In this video, we will cover Azure Virtual WAN deployment using the Citrix SD-WAN solution to manage IPsec tunnel creation between SD-WAN deployed sites and the Azure Virtual WAN Hub, allowing for resource access of any apps that are residing in the VNets in Azure infrastructure from the said sites. This feature allows for deployment of virtual WAN at large scale. So for this deployment, we will need our Azure portal, as well as the latest SD-WAN demo environment in Demo Center. In this example, we're using environment MR5.2. The first requirement is to deploy a remote SD-WAN appliance. We can use the pre-stage config and a 210 standard edition device as illustrated in the zero-touch deployment video. I'll put a link for that video in the description below. Before we get to that, let's look at our topology. So the topology is important to understand. For Demo Center, you have a virtual branch office, you have a virtual data center where our master control node SD-WAN device, as well as our SD-WAN center reside. And there is an internet connection that allows us to connect any branch office device across the public internet to establish virtual paths. This needs to be up and operational before Azure Virtual WAN can be deployed. This is important because we leverage the dynamic public IPs for each internet WAN link that the MCN is designed to auto-detect, and we use that information to establish IPsec tunnels. Those IPsec tunnels that are established are with the Azure Virtual WAN Hub. SD-WAN Center is configured to communicate with the Azure portal and the Azure subscription to build the configuration that will enable IPsec tunnel creation between the remote devices and the Azure Hub. And with the tunnels created, devices on the back end will have essentially a route to get through the tunnels to the respective virtual networks that we have on the back end. In our lab, we have a 10.0.1.4 IP address for a Linux VM, which we can access after the tunnel creation is complete. But we'll come back to this when we get to that part of the demonstration. So the pre-stage configuration, it is important to understand that the 210 site is already there for you. When we look at the respective WAN links, we can see that each of the internet links is configured to auto-detect the public IP. So this is important because Azure Virtual WAN tunnel creation leverages that public IP for path establishment. The other concept to understand is that the branch office, the 210 branch office site, it also has an intranet service configured and enabled. That intranet service defines which WAN links we can use for our intranet service, and these are the WAN links that will be used for the tunnel creation. From a configuration standpoint, that's all you need, and the pre-stage environment has that configured for you. We can take a look at our 210 appliance, and we can validate that one, the virtual path is up and running. We could also validate from a configuration standpoint that it just completed the zero touch, so the configuration is essentially what was handed down. So we do have an intranet service configured. However, the tunnels are not configured yet, so we won't have any data traversing that network. And if we look at the route tables, we won't have any specific routes to route traffic to that network, to the 10 network that's up in the cloud. So we can see that there's no destination of the 10 network. We could also validate that the configuration is clean. No tunnels are created by looking at the IKE IPsec monitoring. So nothing is available at this time. So with that environment ready, we can go to our Azure portal. And first I'll identify the virtual networks that we have in this environment. So there's already a VNet set up. 10.0.1 is our virtual network. There is also a virtual machine already set up. This is a Linux VM. It could be any device that you want to provision in the Azure infrastructure. And if I look at the networking, we have an IP address on that VNet, 10.0.1.4, and we have the respective security groups enabled to allow communication. And for my test, I'll use port 22. Once that is in place, you can begin by creating a resource for Azure Virtual WAN. So we can search Virtual WAN. We can identify it, select it, and create. And in that creation process, essentially what we're doing is identifying the resource group. Once the virtual WAN is created, you can access it from your virtual group and then pin it to your dashboard. So with this setup, what we do is we deploy a hub primarily. So we go in and click New Hub. And this allows us to identify the private address space. So we're going to use 10.0.0.0/24. And we identify the scale. So we're just going to use the 500 megabits per second in this example and confirm. What that does is it creates the deployment of the Azure Virtual WAN Hub, and you will have this populated with the number of VPN sites, which is not populated yet because we haven't gone through the SD-WAN portion of the configuration. So now that the SD-WAN Center has zero-touch deployment configured and done for the 210 site, the 210 site is up and running. You can navigate to cloud connectivity. This also requires connectivity to Citrix Cloud. So if you have not done the zero-touch deployment process, you have to log into Citrix Workspace Cloud first. And again, any pop-up blockers that may be blocking it, there's going to be a pop-up window where you sign in using your Citrix credentials. You will also need to update the subscription information to that of your specific subscription ID. So I'll go ahead and populate that information now. It will also require the tenant ID. It will require the application ID, as well as security key. And you can click apply and confirm. And that allows the SD-WAN Center, which again in Demo Center has access to the internet, to communicate with Azure portal and validate that there's connectivity. If this information of subscription is not correct, then the authentication will fail. And if you need help identifying those entries for your specific Azure infrastructure, you can search for Azure Zero Touch in the documentation. And here you can find the needed steps to identify the subscription ID, application ID in your portal. Okay, so with Azure subscription inputted, we can then leverage the active configuration and click Add. This allows us to add the deployed site. So we will select the 210 site. We'll select the intranet service that's already pre-configured in the staged configuration in Demo Center. We can optionally select the second tunnel, which we don't have, so we don't have a second intranet service, so we won't use that. And with the connectivity to the Azure portal, we have the Azure Virtual WAN, which was created. And then we can select deploy. So in this deployment step, the SD-WAN Center will communicate with the Azure portal. It will then start the creation process of defining the VPN site. We will give this some time for the process to create. Meanwhile, we can go to the Azure Virtual WAN subscription, refresh the page. We can see that the 210 LTE site is available as a VPN site, and it's looking for association. Before we do the hub association, what we need to do is go to the virtual network connections and add a connection and provide a name, select the hub that we created, and associate it with the virtual network. We have to wait until the peering is complete before the deployment is successful before we create the hub association. Okay, so after giving some time for the Azure Virtual WAN to finish deployment, we can take a look at the VPN connected sites, and we can see from the hub that's available, there are 0 VPN connected sites. We can identify that we've already created the virtual network connection. And for our 210 site that was deployed, the association needs to be created. So what we'll do is we'll select the site, create new hub association, select the virtual hub, and we can just put in a password for it and click confirm. So that will do the create the hub association. Okay, so we just have to wait for that hub association to be finished deploying. Okay, so that took about a minute or so. So we can see that now there is a hub association. We can take a look at our hub and we can see now that there is a VPN site that is associated. And if we go back to the SD-WAN Center, we can refresh the page on cloud connectivity, and we can see the latest status of our virtual path. It's waiting for VPN configuration. So we still have to wait for this to be complete. We can take a look at some of the details once that is completed. So we can make use of some of the monitoring tabs in Azure portal, like the connection monitoring, as well as the health monitoring, to gauge the statistics, to gauge visibility into the states. So right now, the branch office site is trying to connect and is establishing connection with the Azure portal. Activity logs, again, are available to monitor that activity state. So as we look at SD-WAN Center, there's also reporting there to help identify what the current state is. And right now it's waiting for the VPN connection. Okay, just to provide further status update to the SD-WAN connection to Azure network, we can see that SD-WAN is reporting that there is a configuration taking place for the IPsec tunnels. It's also reporting that there's a change management that takes place. So with the configuration of the tunnels being created, the SD-WAN Center automatically goes through a process of updating the config to with the tunnel configuration to Azure, and then going through a change management to push that configuration down to the connected branches. So we can see that progress there. The settings can be altered so that you can disable the change management process and to manually issue the change management during a maintenance window or during the time that you prefer. So there's additional settings that are there specific to the polling intervals and et cetera for the tunnel creation. Okay, so we'll allow the change management to continue, and then once that's complete, we'll take a look at the final finished product. All right, and with the tunnels successfully deployed, you should see the statements and status of tunnels deployed. We can now click into the details of that deployment. We can see the states of the connection. We can see the respective IP information of the configured tunnels, as well as the IPsec configuration, and identify the private networks that are on the VNet in the infrastructure. So one of the things to point out is that the local endpoint for the branch office site, it identifies the public IP. If this is a private IP that's being identified in the MCN, then that means that the tunnel's creation will fail because we need to identify a public IP for that tunnel creation, and also the peer IP on the Azure side. We need a public IP there. So those are two public IPs that the tunnel is established with. And with that, we can now go to our Azure portal, and we can refresh the health statistics here for the particular site. And so for a successful deployment, you should see the site as successfully connected. We'll take a look at the connection monitoring to see if there's anything there. It's nothing displayed there. Azure Virtual WAN networks. Again, this was the VNet that we associated or added the connection to the respective hub. And then for the hub, we see that the site is successfully deployed. And we'll go back into there. And for the VPN sites, we will see the respective VPN sites that are connected, and that's the BR210 site, and it reports that it's all connected. Looking at the overview, we can see all the sites that we potentially can deploy and the details associated with that site. Now, from a 210, from the on-prem appliance, the user interface, we can go to the monitoring tab, and we can essentially initiate the communication from our laptop to that device. So if I go back to the topology, with the tunnel successfully created, I can go to my local device that's connected to behind the 210 SD-WAN appliance, and I can access resources that are on that VNet. So I can do a SSH connection to my Linux VM 10.0.1.4, and that will go through the SD-WAN through the tunnel. So I'll have direct IPsec tunnel access to that particular resource. And that is done because when SD-WAN went through the configuration, if we look at our route table for that 210 site, in the tunnel creation, what's been done is 2 additional routes have been added. So one route is the peer Azure public IP address that's defined as the intranet service. And we can see that that's actively being used. And the other one is a static route for the VNet. And again, that's being delivered through the intranet service. And we can see that that's actively being used. And that's the tunnel that traffic is being delivered. We can take a look at IKE, IPsec information and look at the population of respective SAs. And we can see successful communication between the SA parameters. And lastly, we can look at the statistics and look at our intranet service and identify that there is successful packet flow across that intranet service for bytes sent and bytes received. And of course, the proof is actually connecting into the Azure resources using the VNet and delivering the traffic across this intranet service, enabling branch office communication with Azure resources. So that completes the demo. Thank you for watching.